The history of Cork has to do with the history of Ireland. There's a legendary story about a king with ties to the Scythians, Egyptian Pharaohs, Spain, King Melisius, who's they say him and his family are the father of the Irish culture, Gaelic culture, when they invaded here sometime maybe 4000 BC to 1000 BC, wrapped in myth and legend. But they did land here first. Not the king, but his wife, Scotia, who was an Egyptian Pharaoh's daughter, princess, and his uncles and brothers and sons and families. Anyways, they invaded Ireland. But another story will be about that. Another video. Check for the full video of King Melisius. So let's fast forward to the kingdom of Munster and Cork, where the sons of King Melisius divided Ireland into three parts. In the southern area here ended up becoming called Munster. Munster, I'm sorry. Not Munster like Germany. So the Gaelic language originated and is still used to this day, which is really cool, which is tied to the Celtic languages, which makes sense because the Celtics originally came from Central Europe, around Ukraine, worked their way all across the continent, into Britain, into Ireland, and King Melisius and all that correlating. That's when the language started. It was a similar tribal clan system, though, that existed previously to the Melisian invasion, although it was ruled by a king, so forth. Ptolemy, in 100 AD, recorded of an Inverni tribe who lived in this region. He was the first to write down anything about Ireland. Later in the 400s AD, St. Patrick came down to the region. We talked about him in the Dublin episode. And Christianized this area. Later in the 500s, a man named Saint Finbar came to the area of present-day Cork from Kilkenny and built a monastery on the site of Saint Finbar's Cathedral, which is right there. Towers. So that was built in 1800s, but that was the site, basically, that the monastery was built. That started the city of Cork, in a way. But the city didn't really grow, like much of Ireland, until the Vikings came around. So around 912 to 922 AD, Viking traders set up a base and community connected to the sea where they could sail their longboats right here in Cork. And they could launch raids into the rest of Munster. The name Cork derives from Kotter or Kottinger, which is the Norse Viking name for this settlement. The dynasty of Ivar the Boneless ruled over the city and much of the area, but they never really captured all of Munster. Yes, Ivar the Boneless, the same from the Vikings show. Nothing is recorded about this time, though, and the monastery, I guess, was still allowed to exist. The Vikings themselves were Christianized too around the 1000s, so they likely let the monastery survive, the Catholic monastery. There is little record of this time, though, of the Vikings, but archaeological evidence shows that they were here. We're up here on this hill filming this, all above Cork, for social distancing, by the way. I forgot to say that in the beginning. So, there were Vikings here, likely local people too, all living together, until about the 1100s, when the Anglo-Norman invasion of the city expelled the Vikings. And in 1173, right off the coast of Cork, the River Lee, a naval battle between the Anglo-Norman invaders from England defeated the Vikings for good. And the city was proclaimed a charter to Prince John. It was walled and mostly an old English community cut off from England in the Pale in Dublin. So the original area, that walled section of port, is a little river island right there. All this is a little bit different. Old English. And they were walled in because they were surrounded by the hostile Gaelic countryside. The people and merchants in the city had to pay a black rent to the surrounding areas on all imports and exports with their trade with continental Europe. So this coalesced though into an interesting people called the Hiberno-Normans, which were Irish/Norman English nobles. You know, they started becoming kind of their own culture, cut off from the rest of England, mixing with the locals. Those people began asserting their power all over the region. All right, a little interjection from the hill here. We were talking about the Hiberno-Normans. This is the last remaining piece of Hiberno-Norman Cork. This was an abbey, Catholic abbey, built between 1207 and 1288 AD by the newly Norman, Hiberno-Normans, which was a mix of English Normans that came to Ireland over the generations, mixed with the Irish people. This was the Red Abbey, the city of Cork. 1349, the city suffered a huge blow, with about 50 of its citizens dying from the Black Plague. Interesting to talk about now. But 1491, let's fast forward, the Cork played a role in the War of the Roses in England, where an Englishman trying to grab the throne came to Cork to recruit local supporters. I think they call them the faker of the throne, something like that. Anyways, people in Cork didn't really like what was going on the both sides of the War of Roses, so they supported this guy. Several city leaders and citizens joined the cause to oust Henry VII in England, but failed, and they were executed. Cork's nickname as a rebel city originates from this time, 1400s, War of the Roses. But through all this tumultuous centuries, Cork was a trading hub connected to the Lee River, that connected to the South Irish Sea, easy shot to easy shot to southern England and Spain and part of France, directly sailing down. Cornwall, England. In 1577, someone described the city as so encumbered with evil neighbors and Irish outlaws that they needed to watch their gates hourly. They trusted nobody, only married within the town, and they are connected with each other within to affinity. Wow. So the countryside was still run by the Irish clans. Even though some, the Hiberno-Normans were basically a cross of Irish and English. They were set up in Cork. The Tudor conquest, though, of Ireland, 1540 to 1603, changed the character of Cork and introduced many more English settlers, and tried to impose Protestantism, Anglican Church, to its Catholic inhabitants. For example, that tower right there is a Anglican church. Right next to it is Catholic Church, Cathedral. So there's still signs of that to this day, that Protestant introduction. Even though most of its inhabitants sided with the crown, many events happened in the city, like the Catholic people of the countryside flooding the city during the 1579 to 83 Desmond Rebellion, where Fitzgerald, Hiberno English rulers wanted to grab control from English rule of the city. And also a Spanish force landed nearby in 1601 in the 9 Years' War, also threatening the city. But these religious edicts in the heavily Catholic city of Cork was too much for them, and too much drama for Cork and the surrounding towns. They began to capture Protestant ministers and English officials, throwing them in jail and taking their local arsenals. You know, they should have just let the Irish be Catholic. This caused lots of problems, this religious rift. Fast forward to 1641, the Irish Rebellion, where Catholics tried to take over. Cork once again was a stronghold for Protestants who fled into the city, fleeing the countryside. And they defeated the Irish Confederation in a battle to take the city in 1642. Right here. 1644, an English ruler of the city expelled all Catholics, who they moved into the city from the suburbs, making the inner city majority Protestant for almost 200 years. Remember I said earlier the Catholics flooded into the city with that one revolt, and then Protestants came in. There's always been these religious divides in Ireland. It's crazy history. As you can see. Alright, so Ireland and the city of Cork were soon reconquered from any independence movements by parliamentary Oliver Cromwell's forces in the English Civil War. And in 1690, there was a Protestant war between Protestants that occurred in Cork, between the Jacobite and the Williamite supporters, where Williamite supporters sieged the city. So all kinds of violence was happening down there. Religious and power inspired. And that's not the end of that. In the early 1700s, French Huguenots, which are Protestants from France, which is a very Catholic place, so they were persecuted in France. They came here to live. There's still a cemetery, actually, to this day, French Huguenots, down in Central City down there. Many buildings we see today were built during the 1700s. Not as much there, but more down that road. Pretty cool that we can see a lot of it from up here. Cork became known as a butter town. Butter. And exports increased greatly. Also, beef from the countryside was a big business and shipped out of the port, which is past those houses there. The river goes out that way, connects with the sea. By 1800, many people migrated into the city for work, and the city swelled, including some of my ancestors. Migrated from the countryside into Cork before leaving to America in the 1800s. Sheehan was the last name. But extreme poverty and overcrowding were common in the city of Cork, with all these incomers. Once again, it was, for the first time in a long time, because of all these incomers, it became again predominantly Catholic. And many churches were built. Some you can see down here. That one, built 1800s. There's another one up on the hill up there. You can see another one right there. So these were built for all these new residents from the countryside. Around though the 1820s, 1830s, people though began to leave for Britain, Liverpool especially, and North America. Like some of my ancestors who ended up in West Virginia from here. Almost 2,000 Cork residents moved on one day to Ontario, Canada. Mass migration because of this, overcrowding, extreme poverty. Times were rough. It was under English control during this time, still, of course. Ireland was always thought of like a backwater of the English Empire. Ooh, that bell is going off. And especially in 1840, even more people left in the Irish potato famine. The port of Cork and nearby Cobb was a huge port of immigrants out of Ireland, which were, in total was about 1 million people during this time. But the city pushed on through these hard times and people leaving. In late 1880s to 1920s, Cork began to grow again with a Victorian design. Industries expanded and the population once again grew. World War I actually had a lot of volunteers from Cork and to join the army in the World War I. They suffered heavy casualties, unfortunately. Almost 100% of them died. On the Western Front in places like Gallipoli in Turkey. Sad times for people of Cork, families for sure. 1916 to 1923, Cork was involved in the Irish nationalist movements. This stuff is kind of fresh still, so. Social distance. So there was no fighting here on the Eastern Rebellion like in Dublin in 1916, but 1919 to 1921 there was much violence in the city. 1920 was particularly bad as a English crown, allied black and tans, pretty much gang executed people in the city and burnt down sections of Cork. Man, that must have been terrible. 100 years ago exactly. The IRA responded with attacks throughout the city. People were targeted at random and shot, and a lot of violence was on both sides. Locals in 1922 of Cork, they didn't accept the Anglo-Irish Treaty for an Irish Free State, and they took over the army barracks, which is actually right here. 1922. And Cork was the headquarters for the unofficial Munster Republic. But Free State forces in the Irish Civil War, brother fighting against brother. Sad. They attacked by sea and guerrilla warfare raged all across the city about 100 years ago. Irish on Irish. So 1922-23 though, onwards, through all this violence subsided, Cork was now considered Ireland's second city after Dublin, which is the second largest city to this day in the newly Republic of Ireland country, which is still again about 100 years on from now. 98 years. Industries that began thriving in the late 1800s that were here carried on until the closure and economic decline. Hello, doggy. Irish dog. So there are a lot of industries on the ports. Whiskey, beer, that butter I was talking about, beef, some other manufacturing, but these all began to decline over time, and it really got bad in the 1980s when a lot of them closed down. But then something happened called the Celtic Tiger Boom, where tech, pharmaceutical, and other industries, plus tourism, began to thrive in Ireland around the year 2000, 2010. In 2005, Cork was named a European Capital of Culture. Cool. And it has many universities, the connection with the EU, and it has a multi-ethnic population and an Irish soul. But big city, but smaller than Dublin, the largest city in the country, and a town of beautiful rolling hills and river islands, and a port to this day on the river. Cork.